Welcome back to our exploration of digital photography. In part 1, we have covered the basic of digital cameras, providing a solid foundation for understanding how these devices work. Today, we are excited to delve into digital camera part 2, that is operation and maintenance, where we will take your photography skills to the next level. In this part, we will explore the inner working of your camera, learn how to make the most of its features, and discover essential maintenance practices. So let's get started. Before we start, let's watch this video about the basics of a digital DSLR camera.
The camera is made out of two parts, the lens and the body. To attach these two, you would have to find the red dot on the lens, the red dot on the camera, and match them up, and screw it in.
So now that you have the lens attached, you might notice it still won't turn on. That's because you need a battery. Battery me, Ben. To insert this battery, turn the camera over and open this little hatch right here. You'll need to push down and pull open. Now your camera should turn on. And it turned on. On the lens, there's the zoom wheel and the focus wheel. To zoom in, all you gotta do is twist it. And to focus, all you do is twist this. Ben, filming you. Ben. Now you'll notice there's a dial here with all these weird meaningless letters on it. To turn this dial, you're going to press down and twist. Now the two modes you're probably going to be using most are manual M and auto, which is A. If you don't want to worry about things like white balance and ISO, you should probably stick to auto. If you want to adjust the ISO and white balance, you should probably use manual.
So on the side of the lens, there's a switch that says AF and MF. You might be thinking, what does that mean, Ben? AF stands for autofocus, meaning that the camera will do your focusing for you, and MF stands for manual focus, meaning you will have to turn this switch to focus. There's also the stabilizer switch. This quite literally stabilizes your footage. Personally, I usually have it on. I'm not actually sure if this camera has ever had it off. First time, great.
This switch right here will switch you between video mode and picture mode. To switch to picture mode, put it to the right on this camera icon. To switch to video mode, put it to the left on this video icon. To take a picture, make sure you're in picture mode, and then press this button right here. Hey Ben! To take a video, make sure you're in video mode, and press this button right here. It says start and stop.
This right here is a Rode shotgun mic. You might notice that it has a little latch thing on the bottom, similar to how the camera has one on the top. Basically, what you have to do is just kind of put that in and then screw it in, and now it's attached. However, it's not going to be feeding audio into the camera. So what you have to do is you have to get this right here, open it up, plug this into the top slot, which says mic underneath, plug that in. This is very important. Always have your microphone on.
Seriously, always make sure that your mic is turned on. It's easily forgettable, and we've both done it multiple times.
Nothing sucks more than going home and realizing that none of your footage has any audio.
Follow those steps and you'll be using the Canon 7D like a pro. Hey Ben, I'm gonna take your picture. Ben.
Thanks for watching. Stay tuned for next time where we will have another tutorial for you.
So, camera modes can be overwhelming, especially if you are new to photography. However, they are essential tools for achieving the results you want in different situations. In this section, we will simplify it all by discussing the 5 most important camera modes. These modes are available in most of the digital cameras and provide various levels of control over your shots. We will cover auto mode for those moments when you want the camera to do the work, program mode for a bit more flexibility, aperture priority for creative depth of field control, shutter priority for capturing motion, and manual mode for full creative control. By the time we are done, you will have a clear understanding of when and how to use each mode effectively in your photography journey. Auto mode is like having a personal photographer built into your camera. It's perfect for beginners or when you simply want to point and shoot without worrying about settings. In auto mode, your camera takes control of exposure, focus, flash, making incredibly easy to use. The mode is fantastic for quick snapshots and family gatherings. However, keep in mind that auto mode offers limited creative control, so it is best suited for well-lit scenes. Think of it as your trusty set it and forget it mode when you want simplicity and don't want to fiddle with settings. Moving on from auto mode, we have program mode, often denoted as P on your camera mode dial. Program mode offers a step up from full auto, where you gain more control over settings like ISO, white balance, and exposure compensation. It's a great mode for those who want to learn and experiment with photography while still having the camera handle essential functions like focus and shutter speed. Think of program mode as a bridge between auto mode and full manual control. It's ideal for photographers who are starting to get comfortable with their cameras and want to explore creative options. Now, let's delve into the aperture priority mode, often marked as A or AV on your camera mode dial. In this mode, you control the lens aperture, which is the opening through which light enters the camera. Aperture is a critical factor in photography because it determines the depth of field. Depth of field refers to the range of distance in your image that appears sharp and in focus and greatly influences background blur, often referred to as bokeh. When you select a wider aperture denoted by a lower f-stop number, for example f2.8, you are creating a shallow depth of field. This is fantastic for portraits because it isolates your subject from the background, giving you a dreamy, blurry background effect. Conversely, choosing a narrower aperture marked with a higher f-stop number, for example f11, increases the DOF. This is ideal for landscape photography because it ensures that everything in your frame, from the foreground to the background, is sharply in focus. Remember, mastering aperture control is a powerful tool in your photography toolkit. Next up is the shutter priority mode, often denoted by S on your camera's mode dial. In this mode, you have control over the shutter speed, which determines how your camera captures motion. Shutter speed is expressed in fractions of a second and can range from super fast like 1/4000 of a second to relatively slow like 1/30 of a second. When you choose a fast shutter speed like 1/1000 or higher, you freeze the action in your photo. This is perfect for shooting sports, wildlife, or any fast-moving subjects where you want to capture every detail crisply. On the other hand, if you opt for the slower shutter speed, such as 1/30 seconds or lower, you introduce motion blur into the image. This can be a fantastic creative tool. It's great for capturing this silky flow of a waterfall, light trails from moving cars, or even creating artistic effects in portrait photography. Remember, for those slow shutter speed shots, a tripod or a stable surface is essential to avoid camera shake and ensure your subject is the only thing in motion. To better understand the importance of shutter speed, let's watch this video.
On your camera, you have a shutter. This is a little bit like a gate in that it opens and it closes. When your shutter is open, it lets light into the camera. And when it's closed, it stops the light from coming in. Letting light into the camera through the shutter means that you're going to expose or lighten your images. The longer the shutter is open, the more light pours into your camera. Take a look at these two photos so you can really see how this affects it. The first image is a fast shutter speed. This means that the shutter was only open for a very short and fast amount of time. The other image is a slow shutter speed, meaning that the shutter was open a longer period of time, letting in more light. As you can clearly see, the fast shutter speed only lets in a tiny bit of light, which means that the image is darker, whereas the slow shutter speed lets in more light and makes the image lighter. How do you control shutter speed in your camera? Well, there are a couple of options that you can change it with. The first one is shutter priority mode. This is found on your dial with a TV if you're in a Canon camera, or alternatively, if you're in a Nikon camera, it's marked with an S. If you own any of the brands of camera and you're watching this, then you could just resort to your manual and it will give you the instructions there. Shutter priority mode enables you to control the shutter speed in your camera. But there's also another option, and this is manual mode. This is going to be marked with an M on your Canon camera and the same on the Nikon. Now what manual mode does is it lets you have full control over all the camera settings in your camera. This includes shutter speed, ISO and aperture. Now you're probably not aware of ISO and aperture if you're watching this video. Good news, I've actually made a video about aperture which explains what it is and how you can use it. It's really easy to understand and it's nice and quick and to the point. If you want to watch that video, click the card showing above my head right now. So you now know what shutter speed is and where to find it in your camera. So how do you use it to take some lovely photos? Having the shutter open for a short period of time captures and freezes the moment in time. What do I mean when I say this? Take a look at these photos so you can best see what I'm talking about. You can see in these photos that each moment has been captured in time. It's frozen the exact moment that it happened. And this is what happens when you use a fast shutter speed. Now on the flip side of this, if you use a slow shutter speed, you have the opposite effect. This is when the shutter is open for a longer period of time. And because of this, it lets in more light. Now I want you to take a look at some of the examples here of photos that I've taken. The first one is a waterfall photo. Look what's happened to the water. In this photograph, I took this picture at a 10-second exposure. This means that the shutter was open for 10 seconds. Anything that moves in the photograph suddenly becomes blurred and smooth. Now the longer the shutter is open, the more blurred and smooth that the moving subject in the photo is going to appear. But as you can see, this has some really interesting and creative effects to your photos. You can also do this with such things like motorways, for instance. If you go and take a picture of a motorway in the evening and the cars are driving through, then all you're going to pick up is the lights. This is called light trails, and this is a way to create an effect when taking photos with a slow shutter speed. Now if you'd like to know more about this technique, I've actually created a video all on long exposure. This goes into all the details of what you need to do and how to do it. So if you want to watch that, I'm going to leave a link to this at the end of the video. If you have any questions about today's video and anything more about shutter speed, then don't hesitate to leave me a comment down below and we can chat about this after the video. I want to thank everyone for turning up today and watching this video. And if you're new here, remember, hit subscribe, hit the notification bell, and then you can be notified of new videos every single week. Thanks for watching, guys, and whatever you do today, have an amazing day, and I'll see you in the next video.
Now let's dive into the manual mode, represented by the letter M on your camera's mode dial. This mode provides you with complete control over your camera settings, including shutter speed, aperture and ISO. While manual mode offers the most creative freedom, it also requires a solid understanding of exposure principles. It's the preferred choice for photographers who want to take full control of their cameras and resulting image. In manual mode, you decide the precise value for the shutter speed, aperture and ISO, allowing you to adopt a complex lighting situation that achieve your creative vision. However, this also means that you must adjust these settings manually based on your desired exposure and camera's light meter readings. Here are some tips for using manual mode effectively. Consider using a tripod, especially when working with a low light condition. This ensures stability and sharpness in your photo. Don't hesitate to experiment with different combination of settings to get a feel for how they impact your photos. Be patient and persistent. It might take time to get used to manual mode, but with practice you master it. The key takeaway from manual mode is that you have complete creative control. You decide the settings and you have the power to craft images exactly as you envision them. So don't be afraid to experiment and adjust settings until you achieve the exposure and look you desire. To better understand more about manual mode, let's watch this video.
So without further ado, let's get started. So today what we are going to be talking about is how to shoot in manual mode. Now I had a lot of people when I asked on Instagram what people wanted to see. a lot of people asked me to go over the basics of manual mode. And I think that this is so extremely important if you have, I don't even want to say it's just for people who want to do professional photography. This is for anybody who wants to take their pictures to another level. So if you want to have full control of how your camera is going to function and how those images are going to come out, then you want to shoot in manual mode. So manual mode is the M on your camera. Most cameras come and start with the setting in auto, which is usually on a Canon. On mine it says A+, and it's in green. And then you want to go ahead and just switch that over to the letter M as in Mary, or M for manual. So now that we've switched our camera into manual mode, I want to talk to you real quick about why manual mode is so important. So if you have your settings set to auto, then what's going to happen when you go to take a picture is the camera is going to think for itself. It's going to think, okay, what should the depth of field look like? Does it need to be a blurry background? Or, it can decide anything that it wants to based on how it thinks that that picture should come out. So it can crank your ISO up, and I'm going to talk about these things, but it can crank your ISO up, your f-stop. So you're going to have a variety. When you shoot in auto, if you were to watch the settings on the top of your camera or the back, those numbers are going to be going all over the place. So you're not going to produce consistent images every time. The lighting may be similar because that's how your camera is calibrated to function. It is going to make its best judgment call. So I like to know exactly how my images are going to turn out so that when I go into Lightroom or Photoshop, I already know what they're going to look like and I know about what tweaking I'm going to have to do to my presets for that particular image, and it's not going to take me a super, super long time. And don't get discouraged because this does take practice. So just practice, practice, practice. You will get the hang of it, I promise. So when we were talking about manual mode, I want you to remember these 3 settings. That's going to be your aperture, your ISO, and your shutter speed. Your aperture controls quite a few settings. What it is it's how open or closed the blades are within your lens. The more closed they are, the higher your aperture is going to be. So that might be a 5.6, a 10, 11. That means that your aperture is going to be smaller, which means that it's not going to let in as much light, but that means that more things are going to be in focus. So if you have a large group of people, you might want to bring up your aperture to a 4.0, a 5.6, so that you can get everybody in focus. It's going to create a bigger plane, like this thick, a bigger plane for people to be in focus in this line right here. So you might have 2 rows of people that you need in focus. Well, that's going to decrease the amount of light that can come into your image, so your image might be a little bit darker, but then you can go and change some other settings to help counteract that as well. Now, how you get that beautiful blurry background is going to be opening up that aperture. Your blades are going to open right up when you shoot at a low aperture, so like a 1.2, a 1.4. It's going to bring those blades wide open. A lot more light is going to come in. So if you're shooting a wedding, or in a dark place where you need more light, you can bring that number down to a 1.2. It's going to open those blades up, let all that light come right into it, and it's going to give you that beautiful blurry background as well. So I personally love shooting at around a 1.4, 1.6, whether I'm doing couples or just single portraits. So next let's talk about ISO. ISO is your camera sensitivity to light. So if you are in a dark situation, you need your camera to be ultra sensitive to light so it can grab every bit of that and bring it into your image. With that though, you have to be careful. The higher you take your ISO, the more grain you have in your image. Some people even add grain to their images. It's a beautiful aesthetic. So that doesn't really mean anything bad, but you kind of have to play around with it so that you can see in post what your image is going to look like with a higher ISO. Some people can bump theirs all the way up to like 6,500, 8,000, even higher, and they really like their images, how they come out. I personally don't have the easiest time in my post-production when I bring it above 2,000. So I try not to take my ISO too high. When I am outside, it'll stay at 100 unless I'm having a really difficult time with shadows. Then I will bump that up and switch some of my other settings. For the most part, if you are outside, if you're in a bright area, keep your ISO at 100. It's going to let your images be ultra sharp, take out that grain. You can add it in later, but it's just going to keep that light sensitivity at a normal level. So now that you have your aperture and your ISO taken care of, you already have 2 of the 3 settings down. those two, most of the time for your session, are not going to change. You're usually going to keep your ISO and your aperture at the relatively same number, unless I would say if it's sunset, sometimes when that sun goes down and you lose it, but you want to keep shooting, sometimes you might bump up your ISO. But now that we have those two, the setting that can change sometimes, depending on where you're at, is going to be your shutter speed. So your shutter speed is the mirror inside of your camera, and it's how fast or slow it closes. So I'm going to show you real quick what it looks like at 1/8,000th of a second. And now this is what it looks like at 1/10th of a second. So you can see one is significantly faster and one is significantly slower than the other. This is going to, again, help light come into your image. So when you shoot at 1/10th of a second, nothing is going to be in focus because it didn't have that time to grab that image really fast. It took a little bit longer so that it could let in more light. So I would say, just as kind of a rule of thumb, unless you're in a very dark space, which usually if you're in a darker space, there's a little bit of a slower movement, not all the time, but sometimes, I always keep my shutter speed 1/200th or above. 1/200th is always, when I say 1/200th, it just means that it's going to say 200. It doesn't always say 1/200. Just to clarify. But even for me, 1/200th is going to be pushing it a little bit because I love a lot of movement with my couples. I want them running and laughing and playing and, you know, moving around a lot. I like that movement and I want those images to be sharp. I love when there's like kind of accidental blurry images. I don't mind that at all. I deliver those just as much, but I do love the majority of my images to be pretty sharp. In order for that to happen, that mirror needs to capture that image like super fast. Like it cannot be going really slow or everything is going to be super blurry. You need it to go really fast to capture that image. So when you're shooting sports photography, when you're shooting animals, when you're shooting little kids, you need to bump that number up. And you can kind of play with it here and there. So when I have a couple that's out in direct sunlight, I'm going to have that shutter speed all the way up to 1/8000th. I'm going to have it as fast as it can go because that brightness, sometimes I even have to take up my aperture to make the image a little bit darker, and that's totally okay. But sometimes we'll move into the shade. Once we move into the shade, I need to crank that number way down so that I can bring in more light to my image. So like I said before, the majority of the time, my only thing that I will change is going to be my shutter speed. Now, when I first started shooting in manual mode, it was extremely intimidating. So when I started out with photography, I knew that I needed to shoot in manual mode, but I was so intimidated because you have to work really fast when you're working with children, when you are working with a lot of movement. You have to think really fast, okay, what setting is going to change this? What's going to change this? And it's a little bit hard. When you start out, you're not really sure. It's not second nature to know exactly what to change. But I can tell you that after a year of practicing and only shooting in manual mode, I have it down. I know exactly what to change on my camera so that I get that image perfect every single time, so that when I take it into post, it is so much easier. Each one of these settings has a consequence, whether you think it's good or bad, but when you let your camera decide for itself in auto mode, sometimes you're not always going to be flattered with the image that you're going to get. So when you shoot in auto, you really don't have this control over how your image is going to look. And if you have this idea in your mind of, I'm going to have this beautiful blurry background, I have this good camera that I know can achieve that because others have done it with this camera, but whatever reason it's not happening, try shooting in manual mode. If you shoot in manual mode, you can control everything. I will be doing another video on different camera settings that I think every photographer should know, and they're not necessarily to say right or wrong, but it's so that you know what it does. So if you are in a situation where something is off in your image, you may know how to counteract that. You may know how to fix that in your camera right there on the spot. Do it quickly, and then your images will come out flawlessly. I love having full control of my images, and I'm super excited for you guys to practice and learn and understand how to better navigate your camera so that you can get flawless, beautiful images every single time, and you can just practice so that it's consistently coming out that way. I am probably not the best person to explain manual mode, but hopefully that helped you. Don't forget to subscribe and like this video, and we will see you in my next one. Bye!